Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Shanelle. I am the co-founder of the Villij, so one half of the Villij. And I'm super grateful to share this space with you all to kind of just get a better understanding of our emotions and how to process them. Some of you might be new to the Villij, so I just kind of want to explain what we do. We are a wellness organization that is committed to really empowering women's, well-being and understanding of, I guess, their own emotions and needs. Since 2017, we've created this inclusive space to be like nurturing and for us all to connect and heal and learn and share together. So tonight with Villij Talks, it's really just a way to explore the many sides of wellness through shared and reciprocated conversation with the likes of experts like Natasha tonight. So this conversation will be roughly about an hour. Feel free to ask questions in the chat during this time. We won't be answering intermittently, but we will at the very end. Tonight we are joined by Natasha Reynolds, who is a registered psychotherapist here in Toronto. Natasha, how are you?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good, great to see you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I am a registered psychotherapist. I currently am practicing a private practice, and I work with individuals, couples, and families. I went to school at Tyndale University College and Seminary, so I was able to get my Master's of Divinity and Counseling there. But a little bit about kind of how I got into counseling was just being able to understand what it was like to have my own experience with counseling, and that's really what opened me up to the light of wanting to get into counseling myself. So yeah, I currently live in Mississauga, and I'm practicing in Etobicoke.
Nice, that's great. It's great to see, especially women of color, going into these fields. It's so needed. It's so necessary. So I want to launch my first poll to the group. I forgot to mention that we'll be launching polls within this conversation. So I wanted to know a little bit about everybody in the group and their experience with therapy. So I'm going to launch it right now. This is great. That is great. So the majority of us are open to therapy, which is amazing, which is really amazing, because if we know anything, we know that our ancestors were not as open. So I think this is amazing.
This is
wow,
73%. Awesome,
right? That's really good. Okay, so I just want to take this down. All right. So in your experience, I know that you see a bunch of different people from different walks of life, and they go into therapy thinking it's going to be one way or another. Can you tell us what are the common misconceptions of therapy?
Yeah, I think a lot of the misconceptions that I can hear that can make people reluctant to come to therapy is, does this mean that I'm weak for seeking out counseling support? Yeah. Does this mean that I'm going to be just talking about, like, what is going to talk about my problems going to do for me, kind of thing? So just really an understanding of what it means to even have a space to talk about things like emotions or challenges and struggles. I feel like there can be a misconception just based on the stigma of doing that.
Yeah.
And I've been noticing just the different avenues where we see that stigma becoming reduced, which is great. Like Belle, let's talk, and different aspects like that. So I'm grateful to see that shift a bit, but I can see how a lot of misconceptions are, you know, I don't feel comfortable talking about myself, or just even the dynamic of it can be a little bit unfamiliar. So having in counseling, I'm that small circle, and your client is the big circle. It's all about them, what they bring to the table. So I know sometimes even just receiving that support can be unfamiliar for us. So that would be a big misconception that I can see take place in the therapy room.
So the funny thing is, when I tried therapy, I think I was like in my second year of university. And I had this whole idea that as soon as I go in, she's going to fix me. She's going to figure out what's wrong with me. She's going to tell me what to do. And I don't have to come back that often. And we don't need to like go through this too much. So and then it's like, oh, so I can't tell you my feelings, and you can't just like diagnose me right now and like, let's fix this right now. So it was interesting to go through that experience and really heal and, you know, uncover the layers of my life. So yeah.
Yes, good. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that aspect of fixing and what it means to even take that first step, it really allows you to redefine what healing looks like.
Yes.
I know that fix it kind of what's my next step, or what do I do right now, can be unsettling.
That's it. So your work kind of focuses on normalizing the emotional experience through emotionally focused therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So emotionally focused therapy is founded by, her name is Dr. Sue Johnson. And she actually, the concept of this therapy is usually we work with couples in particular where we use this type of therapy, but for working even with individuals, it can be helpful to use as well. But just unpacking it in terms of couples and relationships, oftentimes when we think of our emotions, or when we are communicating with someone, or our partner, for example, or even a family member, sometimes when the emotions are so high, we tend to respond or react, and all the person sees is our behavior. So whether that be it criticizing, or it comes out as anger, or maybe we shut down emotionally. So sometimes being able to understand what's taking place at the core level of emotions can be really helpful to see, oh, okay, I'm actually feeling afraid right now. That's why this anger is coming out. So what emotionally focused therapy does is really being able to understand what's happening at a core level with our emotions. And when we allow ourselves to get in touch and tune into that core level of emotions, that we can now say, okay, well, how am I even responding to this emotion? So oftentimes with couples, we like to refer to it as the dance. So the dance that takes place in relationships, or our cycle. And when we think of a dance, sometimes we can think of almost like a tango. If we're dancing and we're doing a tango, that's kind of like the back and forth that we have.
Yes.
But the music that's playing in the background tends to be if we can look at that as our emotions. So when that music is going fast, sometimes our emotions are taking place so at such an escalated level that we don't even know what's taking place in that dance. So really emotionally focused therapy allows to see, okay, what's happening at the core level, and how is our partner even seeing what's taking place at a core level?
Yeah. I mean, especially like myself, when I first started dating anybody, I just figured that they need to know how I feel, and they should know, like, I don't need to tell them, and you know what I mean? It's like, you should see it on my face, and it's not right. And, you know, I had to unlearn that and learn how to express myself. And I feel like even this session with you is going to allow me to express myself so much better after this. So that's exciting.
That's awesome.
Do you want to share a little bit more about that? Okay.
Hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that because it's so true. Oftentimes we think, they should already know. They should see it. They should see that my arms are crossed, that I'm not happy. And
Yes.
really, we're not even tuning into what's taking place for us as well. So sometimes saying the difference of saying to our partner of, I'm feeling afraid right now when you make that comment, or I feel hurt, is different than, you never tell me this, or you never tell me, you've left the dishcloth out on the floor, on the counter.
Yeah.
So really tuning into what those underneath that can really be those needs of,
Yes.
that inform us of what our needs are based on those emotions. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do have a diagram that unpacks that concept of that dance. So if you can see it correctly, it says, oftentimes in relationships, one person may tend to be that person that pursues in a relationship. So that can look like, I'm going to explain, that critical, I'm going to explain myself constantly. I want to understand what's taking place. And oftentimes another person in that relationship may tend to find that overwhelming and tend to withdraw. So they may become distant and shut down. And what's really helpful when we are looking at this dance is that how we learn about conflict in our family of origin, in those relationships with our family members, or in previous romantic relationships, really teach us how to handle conflict. So a part of the work of emotionally focused therapy is also gauging a bit of the history of, where did we learn some of these behaviors? And that's why I love the way you shared, like, just your experience of having to unlearn certain things.
Yeah.
Sometimes we learn things in different relationships. So when it comes to our current romantic relationship, we wonder what's taking place. Why is my partner not hearing me? So this is a bit of just that dance that plays out. And as you can see underneath it, there's those primary emotions
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes are not always addressed. So the work of emotionally focused therapy is really to allow couples to hear what's happening underneath this, as opposed to just it's what we call that secondary emotion, just that rage and resentment and frustration. So yeah, that's my little diagram there.
Nice. So you've mentioned couples, but a lot of times I speak to my mom, or I speak to an aunt, and I can feel these emotions happening and I don't really know how to connect with them. So is this something that can be used between family members or friends as well?
Yes, absolutely. So we use this method in terms of working with families as well, and just understanding what's happening for yourself when you're having an interaction with someone. What is the emotion that's coming up for you, and how am I even responding to this person? So yeah, absolutely. In family relationships, we can definitely see that cycle take place as well.
Yeah. So what happens in the first session of emotionally focused therapy?
So in the first session, typically, if I'm working with a couple or a family, I would just meet with them to understand what's taking place. So sometimes we even see this dance play out in the therapy room. So we'll typically ask we want to be able to understand what their goals are for counseling, of course, but also be able to say, okay, what is a specific example where we can really slow down this dance? And oftentimes that dance, like I said, when the music's going high, when their emotions are high, they can't slow it down. So this space of counseling allows us to really take a look at it and slow it down and see what's taking place. So that's what typically to expect in a first session, is to really unpack the specifics.
Yeah.
And see me with my whiteboard filling in what's actually happening for them.
That's nice. So I want to ask our viewers, what are your emotional goals? If you can drop a little line in our chat here, I would love to hear what kind of goals you have when dealing with emotions, or trying to filter those emotions. Please let us know. Yes, that's a great one. Recognizing and naming what I'm feeling. That is a big one. It took me a very long time to do that. And I still have some trouble once in a while to allow them to flow through me. Yes. Yes, there's strength behind feeling for sure. When I'm
Yeah.
triggered, to stop flying off the handle. Woo. Yes, I know a few people in my family like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
hard one to undo, but for sure, it's one of those things that you have to learn. Being able to
Definitely
be calm when I'm triggered.
practice.
Yeah, these are some good ones. Allowing myself to feel them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for myself, it's just, so I used to be an ice queen. I used to just like stay silent and just like give dirty looks in my 20s. In my 30s, I've undone that, but I think it's just learning how to overcome emotions, because I feel like sometimes I sit in them for a little too long, you know? So that's definitely a goal for me.
I like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna launch a second poll. I want to know, hold on. Do you find it easy to explain your feelings? Nice.
So a lot of sometimes.
I'm gonna share these results. And I think that's completely normal, right, Natasha? It's hard to kind of pinpoint what you're feeling when you're feeling it, especially if it's overwhelming.
It's true. Sometimes it's challenging to explain our feelings. And that's why I know sometimes just even being able to slow it down. I know that's a term that I use a lot, is slowing it down, because when we first feel it right away, we're not expected to just know exactly what. So taking that moment of actually saying, okay, I don't know what I'm feeling, I can't explain it right now. That actually takes a lot of strength to do that, and to just have that moment to step away. I know for me personally, being able to even, I know writing down, just kind of word vomiting in my notes can really be a way to help pinpoint what's going on. So yeah, explaining it is definitely the next step, but feeling it and being able to label it first takes a moment to tune in.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to just kind of go through all those emotions in order to process them is a really big one. I find, especially when feelings feel uncomfortable, some people want to kind of suppress what it is they feel and kind of ignore what they're going through. But yeah, like it's so big to just, first step is allow yourself to feel.
Yes, exactly.
So we just talked about uncomfortable feelings. So we know that, of course, emotions can be uncomfortable at times. What are some helpful tools to process them?
Yeah, and absolutely, it is uncomfortable to sit with certain emotions. So a lot of times what I encourage is to be able to first recognize, okay, I'm feeling that I'm at an emotionally elevated place. So sometimes just being able to tune into our bodies. I know sometimes our bodies will be giving us an indicator that, okay, pay attention to me for a moment. So whether that be our heart's racing fast, or we're starting to feel really hot, or even maybe we notice our fist is clenching. So really tuning into that, okay, this is an indicator for me to now pause. And so I know that pausing can look like different things to different people. So pausing for some people can say, okay, I want to take a couple of deep breaths for myself. Maybe I want to walk for a moment. Maybe I want to journal. So taking that moment to pause would be a really important step when processing through emotions. The next step would be to be able to label that emotion.
Mm.
So saying, okay, now that I've maybe taken some deep breaths and I'm able to decrease even that physical symptom that's coming up for me, what is it that's really happening? I notice anger. I notice anger, but what's really happening? Is there a bit of fear there? Is
Mm-hmm.
there a bit of confusion there? So
Yeah.
just trying to label what it is that you're actually experiencing. And after being able to label that emotion, allowing ourselves to validate ourselves. Sometimes we refer to that as even almost that self-soothing. We're able to say, okay, it's okay. Like, I feel afraid right now. And you know what I'm going to say? It's okay to feel afraid right now.
Mm-hmm.
Almost, I know sometimes having that key word that helps us just be neutral. So sometimes I'll use a word just when observing myself and my own emotions, like interesting. There's fear. Interesting, because interesting can be a term that's neutral that allows us to just observe. And
Yeah.
so sometimes having those little tricks of just responding to ourselves in that way and being able to observe can allow ourselves, it's an act of kindness to ourselves, because we're creating that sense of space of, okay, I'm worthy to actually feel my emotions and take a moment to explore that emotion.
Yeah.
So after that step of really being able to validate ourselves by just saying it's okay right now, or using that term interesting, the next step would be exploring, okay, what do I want to do with this? How do I want to respond to this? Do
Mm-hmm.
I need to maybe, what is this telling me about how I need to respond? Because those emotions are really great indicators to inform us about our needs. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed, maybe that's telling me about my needs of, I need a moment to recoup. I need a break. Maybe I need to set up some boundaries in place for my life.
Yes.
um, so it allows that when we explore, it allows us to take a moment to say, what are the next steps? But first, really processing through that will help us be more mindful of what it is that we actually need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Mm-hmm.
especially once you find out what you need, you'll know what you need from your partner, what you'll need from your family, what you'll need from your friends, and you'll know which boundaries to put up, because those are seriously an act of self-love. I know
Mm-hmm.
when I didn't have boundaries, I didn't feel well. And I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to kind of process how I was feeling or why I was feeling a certain way. I was just kind of taking everything in and trying to put on like this brave face and go about my day. But once I started
Yeah.
putting up the boundaries, vocalizing my needs, and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing when I needed to take time for me, that is
Mm-hmm.
when like I could see myself kind of transcending and feeling less anxiety, less depression, less a lot of things. So yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree with what you're saying right now. Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
It's so true. It's so true. Being able, I feel like there's so much. It's a bit of fear around it. If I feel it, then I'm going to go into this swirl. And actually, the positive is, if I feel it, I'll know more about myself of what I need. But of course, that is being able to feel it in a way that is, also validating of ourselves.
Yeah.
So.
So
Mhm.
somebody had mentioned privately to us that it was kind of like their background kind of hindered the way they could feel in a sense. And can anybody agree with that? Because I know, coming from a Caribbean background, like, feelings in my family are not a thing. Like, you put on a brave face, you get through it, you suck it up, you get a little gangster if you have to, and you go about your day and you succeed. And, so it was really hard for me to express to certain family members, like, listen, I'm not feeling well, and like, I need you to honor this right now, and um,
Mhm.
not feel weak at the same time, right? So yes, it's good to see that
Yeah.
everybody's in the same boat. Yes. Yeah, it's
I'm
so
so glad.
real.
I'm
So
so glad.
Sorry?
It's so true. I'm
Mhm.
so glad that you brought that up because it's so true. What we are taught about what emotions are even framed as. So, that emotions can be seen as weakness. And I know someone wrote in the comments, vulnerability is not weakness. And I appreciate that because
Yes.
it's true. How vulnerability has been painted has been very much associated to being weak, and almost that praising, don't show any emotion. That's when we sometimes get praised for that.
Yeah. And
So
even with my partner, we've kind of had to like break this threshold of like, he's coming from a Caribbean background and he's a guy. Talk about
mhm,
feelings. How are you feeling? Oh,
mhm,
well, the shrugs and the I'm good, and just kind of like breaking through that, and learning that this is not weakness. This is just like getting to know yourself and connecting with whoever
mhm,
you're speaking to at the same time. So that's great.
mhm.
Yeah, so actually coming into relationships, I want to know, how does understanding our emotions relate to our relationship with others? And we did speak about that a little bit, but can you go a little
Mhm.
deeper on that for me?
Yeah, for sure. So oftentimes when we allow ourselves to understand our emotions, it helps us in terms of how we are able to express that to our partners. So when we say, instead of kind of going to that tendency to react to our emotions, us taking a moment to actually say, what is it that I'm actually feeling? And maybe it's, I'm feeling a bit hurt when you said that, or I'm feeling a bit hurt hearing that and afraid that I'm alone in this. Maybe that's really at the core level of what's taking place. And when we're able to actually express that is vulnerability right there.
Yes.
And the amount of connection that can take place by, well, being able to share that with your partner is holds a lot different impact than saying, you know, why don't you ever do this for me? Or, blaming and criticizing, or even just alternatively shutting down, not saying anything,
Mm-hmm.
because all we see is that what takes place is that feeling of disconnection. So really being able to unpack those emotions and slow it down gives us the ability to connect with our partners and opens up opportunities to gain deeper understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that with emotionally focused therapy, we will ask partners to turn to their partner and say, can you share that to your partner? Can you share that I was hurt? And the ability to be able to look into your partner's eyes and say, I actually felt hurt. It's unbelievable how impactful that can be, just making that eye contact. It's
Mm-hmm.
that aspect of intimacy as well as vulnerability.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
real.
I know,
Go
mhm.
ahead. Go ahead. What did you say?
Oftentimes Dr. Sue Johnson, she refers to that as hold me tight conversations. So being able to cultivate those hold me tight conversations where you're just being real about what is taking place, as opposed to that facade of, there's nothing going on here, I'm just really mad about you leaving the dishcloth out. So it's getting to a different level of intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody who wants to experience therapy but is a little afraid of it or apprehensive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, it's okay to, I think that's oftentimes it's okay to recognize that apprehension. I know talking to a stranger takes a lot of courage to do,
Yeah.
and especially to open up so much vulnerability. But I would just, encourage that it is a step of courage, just taking that first step to even contact someone. And really, I would encourage that you feel, just to know that therapy is also feeling connected to the person. So I know there's a lot of even resources of how to find a therapist that you feel that you can connect with.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just encourage, even, I don't know if you've heard of Psychology Today, but that is a great resource to just look for a therapist
Mm-hmm.
and see, okay, you get an opportunity to even read their bios to see if they if that person is someone that you feel like you resonate with, and being able to know that, you know, that's amazing first step forward. And it's okay to feel afraid because it makes sense. But once you get in there is really what allows you to shape your understanding of it.
Yeah. And for myself, just having experience going to therapy in the past, I find I was really critical about who I'm going to choose, and they had to have like a similar background. And at that time, um, it wasn't a regular thing to see a woman of color. So I had a white male, and I was like, okay, I'm not sure if we're going to connect. He ended up like dispelling all of my issues with that. And we had like this great connection. So, you know, I do encourage, if you are looking for therapy, don't shy away from trying, especially for the first session. Because the first session, like, you'll kind of feel them out, and sometimes you have to go for that second one as well. But yeah, don't give up, because even if that person's not for you, the next person may be. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So right now I want to turn the questions to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Natasha? Yes, Anna, they do definitely give 15 to 30 minutes consultation.
Yes.
It's a good way to feel it out, for sure.
Yeah, consultation calls are a great way just to hear the person on the phone.
Feel free to ask any questions. This is a safe space for sure, and we're open to all of them. Oh, that's a great one. So Erica says, how often do you recommend going to therapy?
Yeah, so oftentimes different agencies, or even there's different private practices that have different limitations on like how many sessions you can have. But if you have the access to going to a private practice, oftentimes there isn't really a limit on how many sessions per se. But when working with couples in particular, I know sometimes having that meeting on a weekly basis can be helpful, just to gain that consistency and that mindfulness of that cycle that takes place. And then gauging how that is working for you. But typically we say 10 sessions is a good ballpark number to start off with in terms of that couples work. And depending on even the individual factors, so oftentimes it can be longer for different issues that take place. So if there's trauma, kind of wanting to unpack more, and that is more of a slower work in terms of just slowing down that cycle that's taking place. So that can take 10 to 20 sessions would be more of that ballpark.
So just a quick question before we go to the other one. What do you say to somebody who wants to do couples therapy, but their partner is apprehensive about joining? Because that's a big one.
It is a big one, and that's a great question, because oftentimes when we are working with couples, you know, wanting to ensure that both people are on the same page and willing to do the work. So we do, in the first session, it is about really understanding what the goals are. But let's say one partner is not open to couples counseling and you're open to counseling. I still recommend that the individual is able to have that individual work for themselves. And if the partner is ready for couples counseling, then that can take place. But typically, being on the same page of both being committed to work is what makes it effective. And that's really counseling. It is a collaborative process. I know we're talking about wanting to be fixed, so it's definitely a collaborative process.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what are the charges for consultations with yourself?
Okay, for myself, so I do have 30-minute free consultation calls. So, and then that's being able to understand if we're a good fit, if my services are what you're looking for, and what your hopes are for counseling. And then after that, the fee is $150 for myself, but typically for private practice, it usually ranges from that amount to 100 to one and up to 250 for different therapists.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the most challenging aspect of your job?
It's a good question. The most challenging aspect of my job, it would be, I would say it would be more sometimes even in myself wanting to do more, even that fix it, but really understanding that true, being able to understand the healing process is sometimes just rewiring. What is healing? Healing is also being able to allow ourselves to create that space to talk about it. And oftentimes when we have wounds that are developed relationally, so maybe traumatic events that had occurred relationally, rebonding that through the therapeutic setting is that healing process.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes being able to really rewire what we understand as healing. And I know sometimes growth we may see as oftentimes society will tell us only external measures of growth is what's growth. So accomplishments, anything that we can see externally, but really healing is being able to do that inward growth of the character. And that's sometimes even being able to say, I went to counseling to talk about myself. That's growth in itself. I allowed space for myself to say I matter and I can talk about how I'm feeling.
Yeah. That's
so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that answered your question.
So someone asked, if neither my partner and I have been to therapy before, do you think it's okay for us to try couples therapy together, or do you recommend us doing it individually first?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so oftentimes couples will come in and this maybe is their first exposure to counseling is couples therapy. And I think that is both people are willing to do work and being able to work on their relationship, and I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
If there are things that are coming up that may require some understanding of maybe individual support that might be needed, then that's something that could be recommended as work progresses. But I think that's great to even be able to say I want to join counseling with my partner as a first time. Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between moods, feelings, and emotions?
Moods, feelings, and emotions. Okay. So in terms of how I see it as,
Yeah.
I know sometimes those different textbook definitions can be tricky to answer. But in terms of moods, that can be sometimes just an overall understanding. So sometimes mood can feel like general. I would see as more general, like I'm in a bad mood.
Mm-hmm.
Feelings and emotions, I would believe that would get more specific on what it is, kind of narrowing down that, pinpointing it.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to narrow down and pinpoint it is really what kind of is that, like I said, that way to be able to understand the underneath.
Mm-hmm.
The need.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. What ways that worked have you seen people use to encourage a couple to go to a meeting if you're not a part of the relationship but care about the couples? So I'm guessing they're asking how can I encourage a couple that a partnership that I'm not in to go to therapy?
Okay. Yeah, so I know sometimes just even having a normalized conversation about therapy can be, I know sometimes it can be tricky because we feel like, how do we bring up therapy and not wanting to put someone on the defensives of, oh, I think you should just go to therapy in that way. So being able to just have a casual conversation about counseling and, even understanding collaboratively. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that something you've ever considered? I've heard things that can be really helpful. And so sometimes just being able to encourage a conversation that way by asking what someone's thoughts are on it can be helpful to just create that space to talk about it.
Yeah. And have you ever consulted teenage couples?
Teenage couples, no, not necessarily, no. More old, like kind of, I see a lot more even proactive couples, so couples that are in a relationship where they're not necessarily married, but they're saying, okay, this is something that we notice is coming up, a problem that's maybe reoccurring, and we want to be able to address this before we get serious. And I've been seeing that, which I think is great when couples are proactive about something and they notice that they want to improve on. So
yeah,
it's definitely, counseling is I know I did want to even specify that sometimes people think counseling is only for these, I should only go to counseling if this is the problem in my marriage. But really, counseling is a place to say, I want to learn how to connect better with my partner and even communicate better.
yeah.
So,
for myself, like I have a great communication line with my partner, but I find like when we talk about certain things that could be a little touchy, we might shut down. So it's just about like breaking that barrier. So I suggested like, oh, we should try therapy. And he's like, for what? Nothing's wrong. I'm like, it doesn't have to be a problem. But it's like, you know, it's just one of those things that you want to learn how to connect with the person and align yourself with the person fully and wholly, and not just, you know, the fun stuff or the easy stuff, but also the hard conversations as well, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, those raw spot conversations can.
Yeah, like who wants to talk about money? I don't, but I do at the same time. A good question. When engaging with an older couple in therapy, do people ever feel like you can't help them just because you're so much younger? How do you get around that?
That's a good question. I like that.
Yeah.
I definitely will encounter different responses from people that, you know, may have different perceptions of what a therapist should look like, or how old a therapist should look, or different, you know, perceptions of what therapy is already. So in that regard, I like to look at it as, you know, as my role as a therapist is really to be a facilitator of what's taking place in the room. So emotionally focused therapy is not necessarily about having, you know, suggesting, oh, I think you should do this, I think you should do that. It's really looking at what's taking place in the room emotionally. What are some of the emotions that come up, or the responses to those emotions that block connection, and really being able to reflect that back. So I usually just like to, you know, obviously I want people to feel like it's a good fit for them. So if they don't feel comfortable, that's okay.
Yeah.
If they prefer, kind of preferring someone that's a different age, that's more in their comfortability. But my role is really to be a collaborator and facilitating what's taking place.
Yes.
So they're really, I like to see it as they're the experts on their own life, and I'm just helping facilitate what's taking place. So
I like that. And you're giving the couples power to kind of heal at the same time. It's not just like, okay, Natasha's going to tell me what to do and how to fix it, but it's like we have the ownership to fix it ourselves. So I love that. What do you suggest to people with limited income when it comes to their seeking therapy, like sliding scale, etc.?
Right. Yeah. So I know there's different agencies that do offer counseling support with a sliding scale. So I think that's a great resource. I know there are different even walk-in clinics that they have. So I did my internship at Catholic Family Services, and they provide actually walk-in support every Tuesday and Thursday. So if someone is on a sliding scale, I know they have different options for that. And so there's definitely different resources available just to address what therapists do offer sliding scale.
Yeah. If there's anybody joining from the Montreal area, I used Argyle Therapy, Argyle Institute. And basically what they did was you had to show them like all your information, your pay stubs or no pay stubs, and just kind of let them know what your income was like. And then they found you a therapist that would fit with your budget. So that was a great experience for me as a college student, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there a certain amount of time a couple should be together before seeking couples therapy? This is a great question.
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. Yeah, oftentimes I don't really like to view it as necessarily time. I think sometimes being able to look at what are the issues that are coming up and maybe that are reoccurring. And sometimes when we look at even the dance that plays out, I think I really like to encourage that proactive work, because sometimes that dance has played out so many times that it can be challenging to interrupt that. Yeah. So I know that that can be a common thing of why I don't want to seek counseling this early on. What does this say? But really, counseling is just to reflect, is to help organize information and make sense of what's taking place for each partner, because both of their emotional experiences are valid. And oftentimes when the dance is playing out, it's harder to see what's happening for each person, because sometimes we're trying to protect our own emotions. Yeah. So yeah, I know if I would just be looking at more of, is this something that's reoccurring and I feel like it's blocking connection, would be the main thing that I would tune into. And are both parties willing to create a space to unpack some of that?
Especially if you see a promising future with that partner. I know that all of us come from different walks of life and have different experiences, and communication doesn't look the same for all of us. So even starting in the in earlier on in a relationship, you might come out better than somebody that's been together for 50 years. Just doing that work together early on kind of sets you up for life. So I think that's great. How can you differentiate between enabling behavior versus supporting a partner? It's a great one.
That's a great question. Yeah. So in terms of feeling like there's a behavior that's taking place and wanting to know, am I enabling this person or am I supporting them? And a really big distinguishing factor for enabling is, how am I holding this person accountable? How am I recognizing what they're going through, but how am I also taking steps to hold them accountable? And oftentimes in relationships, looking at what are even the concept of boundaries. So, as we talk about emotions, sometimes we think does that mean that, oh, we just now can, this doesn't mean emotionally dump on people. This doesn't mean that we can emotionally just, unload with not having a consciousness of how that's impacting others. So really being able to understand what are the boundaries that needs to be in place here, and really what does accountability look like for this person.
That's great. Honestly, that was such a good question. How can you identify with somebody that needs therapy for inner healing? How do you identify when somebody needs therapy for inner healing? Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of like, if for yourself or for someone else, I definitely think that patterns and seeing how things they reoccur. And so when we start to notice, like, wait a second, this is something I'm noticing this to be a pattern, or I'm noticing this to be a pattern in my relationships, or so sometimes that can be a cue to say, what do I need to do to really tune in? What are these, am I finding myself becoming triggered? And if there's things that I become really emotionally activated with. So being able to say, okay, just noticing that. And sometimes that can be an indicator to say, how do I just unpack what's taking place for me? And that can be a really big indicator to saying, this is time for me to take a little deeper look at it.
Yes. So our last question here, what is the best way to support a partner that's grieving a death and may be depressed at the same time acknowledging the support to your own boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. That's a great question. So basically, yeah, how do we support our own boundaries and help a partner going through grief and depression?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. So it sounds like wanting to support someone else as well as checking in with yourself of what are my boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think being able to check in with people. So, checking into how are you feeling right now? How can I best support you during this time? And when we hear that, when we allow ourselves to ask those questions, it allows us to even check, okay, is this something that I can do to support? So it's really being able to open up those conversations of collaboration and sometimes understanding that I know you brought up earlier that almost that expectation is this person should know how to help me.
Yeah.
So having those conversations really say, okay, no, teach me what you need right now. And it's okay to ask that. We all have different needs and even understandings of what love and support looks like for us.
Yes.
So I think being able to collaborate and check in is a really great way to help with that support.
Yeah, that's real. Thank you all so much for asking such great questions. Honestly, yeah, no, those are questions that I have for myself even, so that's great. Natasha, what services do you currently offer? And how can we connect? How can our viewers connect with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I offer individual counseling, couples counseling, as well as family counseling. So our office is located in Etobicoke. If you want to connect with me, I am on Psychology Today. So if you look up Natasha Reynolds, you'll be able to find my bio and the different things I specialize in, as well as the clinic that I'm at. So the clinic I'm currently at is called Toronto Neurofeedback, and that is in Etobicoke.
Okay, and do you offer online therapy as well?
I do. I offer online virtual counseling. So phone sessions is something I offer, as well as video chat sessions.
Okay, great. So perfect. Thank you all for coming. Definitely, if you're not already, follow myself and my co-founder Kim at The Villij on Instagram and Facebook. Look for our newsletters. We're coming out with some new Villij Talks in the next 2 weeks. We're very excited for. Natasha, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I needed this. I know, I hope you all needed it as well. Like, emotions are such a big thing and so important to kind of dive deeper into it. So I really hope that we all come as a higher being after this and we know a little bit more about ourselves. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you guys next time. All right, Natasha. So have a great night.
Thank you. You as well, Shanelle. Nice to see you and nice to chat with everybody.
Yes, we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Take care.
All right, you too.